Allow me to introduce our panellists for this conversation around safer workplaces, consultative and cohesive contractor management. First, we've got Glenn McLaren, who's the Assistant State Secretary-General of the AMWU, the WA branch, who's been a union official for 25 years, and also a sitting board member of a number of committees, including the Work Health Safety Commission of WA and the Mining and Petroleum Industry Advisory Committee. We've also got Navin Vij, the Parabellum International CEO and MD, a market-leading RTO focused on emergency response and medical services, working extensively across mining, oil, gas, government and defence industries. Got John Sheridan, the Executive Director of Remote and Offshore Operations at Compass Group, with extensive experience across engineering, construction and project delivery for the oil and gas industry, mining and public infrastructure projects. And Christina Foley, who's the Workplace Mines Safety Chief Inspector and Director, who has more than 19 years of experience within the mining and exploration sector. Can you join me in welcoming our panellists? So I want to give a little bit of preface to the conversation we're going to have. Contractor companies, it goes without saying, play a really crucial role in the sector, from feasibility, heritage, social and cultural exploration, construction and drilling, professional and scientific services, you name it, the list goes on. And so without effective contractor management, and the sector would be very hard pressed to deliver the desired outcomes. In 2020, the Productivity Commission noted that in order for effective resource activities or resources activities to maximise their contribution to the Australian community, environmental heritage and social impacts must be appropriately managed and regulated. So in this discussion, we're going to explore the effective management of contractor systems. We're going to talk about a risk-based collaborative approach to how we do that, talk about the challenges and the opportunities, as well as ways to address them. So, big conversation. I'm going to go, John, let's jump in first with you. Let's talk about the challenges that are involved in this space to begin with. When you hear that preface around, consultative and cohesive contractor management, where does your mind go to immediately in terms of the challenges that we need to collectively work to address?
Thanks, Holly. I might just go back a bit and just give a little bit of context about what we bring to driving respect. So Compass Group, we operate a lot of villages around the country. We have over 140. Myself and a colleague, Toby Edmonds, we lead a team of 5,000 people providing services on those villages. And all of the data talks about village staff in villages being of particular risk and impacted by the behaviour in FIFO. In WA, we operate 60 villages, 3,000 people. Now, 85% of the sexual assaults that have happened to our people have happened because of people that don't work for us. So a lot of what we have done in our journey of diversity and inclusion is to try and make our people safer when we put them into what we called out in 2022 internally, a very unsafe place. In 2022, we said the single biggest critical risk to our people in FIFO is sexual assault. Not driving, but sexual assault. So what we did is we developed our own internal task force to go and investigate why. And this isn't around a particular incident about why the situation happened, but why this is the biggest critical risk to our people. And what we found was a lot of the data that's been presented here, which is excellent, but we went and asked young females who work for us, young men who work for us, and we listened to their story. And they spoke about they're new to FIFO. 30% of our people are young, less than 30. 25% of our people have less than 6 months experience, 40% less than 12 months. So these people are brand new to FIFO. And we asked them, they said, when you walk into the airport in the morning in a shiny shirt, they feel the eyes, right? They feel, they hear the comments. When they're sitting on the plane, the predatory behaviour starts. So what we did, when we inducted our people, and we've got an academy here in Perth, we told them about the risks you're going to face going into FIFO. right, up on one of those 60 mine sites that we provide village services to. We told them about predatory behaviour. We told them about grooming. We told them about things you wouldn't think you would need to induct your workforce on, but we needed to do it because of the risks to our people. And one of the great things we developed was a personal safety plan, and we've actually been criticised for why should a young female or a young male have to have a personal safety plan in this industry. Well, 85% of sexual assaults have happened because of people that don't work for us. It's to help our people be safe. It's simple things. Now, this plan is a simple plan that, buddy up with a friend that you're comfortable with. Know your surroundings, know your limits. Listen to your intuition. Things like that is what this personal safety plan was. So when we talk about driving respect and the journey we've been on, I think it's been a long journey, but we bring that context to this seminar today. And I guess our ask of a lot of the people here in the room is when you think of 85% being impacted to our people, you can see how much you can do to help us make our people safe and the other people that provide village service operations.
I really appreciate the candour that you've kicked off our conversation with, John. It's pretty confronting to think about that management challenge from the standpoint of protecting your own people in that regard. Christina, I'd love to come to you and just building on an opportunity to respond, obviously, and build on what John talked about there in terms of what you see as the major challenges in this area. But I do want to start us talking about MSMSs as well, and what's the why for them when we think about their role here and how to do them effectively. I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Thanks, Holly. So to go to the first point about the challenges, last year was the first year that we saw the number of contract employees eclipse the number of full-time employees in the mining sector. So I think that's a fairly big notion for us to try and wrap our head around, is that we now have more contractors in our sector than we do have full-time employees. When we have contractors, subcontractors, labour hire, all of those different types of relationships, we have to consider that we're bringing a lot of cultures together and a lot of subcultures together. And when we try and lead or try and manage those labour hire, subcontractor to the contractor to the mine opera type relationships with a one-size-fits-all type of approach, that doesn't work. And what we might have is a misalignment of the views of what success looks like and what good risk management looks like. So we've got varying levels of what is acceptable in certain types of cultures. So what I'm saying is we have more contractors in the sector, but we're still trying to lead in the same way that we're managing all of our FTEs and not considering that they are very, very different. On to the second part with regards to the MSMS. The MSMS is covered under Part 10 of the Work Health and Safety Mines regulations, and is essentially your tool with regards to your risk management to bring all of your elements together under a single framework. The importance of the MSMS when it comes to this psychosocial hazard is we would like to see within your health management plan, because we do now prescribe under the regulations that the psychosocial regulations that were introduced on the 24th of December 2022, that PCBUs have a duty to treat that hazard or that harm in the same way that you would treat falls or operating equipment. So it's very important that we have the MSMS, and within there we have our health management plan. And health isn't just your physical health, it is your psychosocial and your psychological health, and within there, that's where you would have your controls.
Navin, can I come to you, because you've got this interesting vantage point, working up and actually designing MSMSs for a number of organisations in the industry. So I'd love your views on the challenges around contractor management and the effectiveness, but also your insights around, what are the core components of this work done well? What needs to be in place to ensure you've got quality when it comes to contractor management systems?
Yeah, thanks, Holly. I think the main element here is we've traditionally focused on work tasks, frontline work tasks in health and safety. That has been drilling, blasting, haulage. We've never focused on psychological hazards, psychosocial hazards, and we are seeing the result of that, and the Enough is Enough report shows that. Frontline tasks have been traditionally managed pretty well, relatively safe, but we have not focused on other elements. Now, the key element here is for us to all move away from contractors, employees, and those terminologies on the ground. Ultimately, yes, we understand everyone is engaged differently from a commercial aspect, But when you're on the ground, and we see this time and time again, frontline workers do not want to see a division. They do not want to see themselves as a contractor. They do not want to see themselves as an outsider. We design mine safety management systems through our division, but we also have frontline emergency response and medical teams. And we see ourselves in a unique position where we learn a lot of lessons by having staff on the ground, and we try and implement those lessons in safety systems. Ultimately, we have teams ranging from 10 on site through to sole individuals. And we have a lot of challenges with lone worker, teams where the one individual is by themselves a lot of the time in remote locations. So we look at that and say, how do we get away from that? We move away from us being a sole individual in a team to being embedded within the company's organisation. And that is on the ground, we are in the same office. We might change and have the same uniforms. Little measures that don't cost any more, but are part of the design and strategically done, make a world of difference to frontline workers and feeling embedded and part of a greater team.
Glenn, I'm watching you nod in response to some of that, and Navin mentioned an interesting point there that it might be different how people are engaged from a technical standpoint, but when it comes to the reality of operating a site, it's really important that we're creating conditions of care that are equal for everyone there. I wanted to ask you, with your perspective, having been involved in the union for some time, how do you see the challenges? And also, I'm interested specifically to get your take on how you involve contractor workers in activity and create this sense of belonging and connection on site. How do you make sure they're meaningfully feeling engaged?
Yeah, thanks, Holly. Look, we've heard for some really good speakers earlier today, and some really good work is being done, but I'm a little bit blunt and forthright, and I think someone's going to rue the day they ask for a union official to sit up here and talk about contract management. I see it a little bit differently. I see contracting comes down to dollars and cents. Traditionally, the Tier 1 mining houses, the St George's Terrace miners, they're looking for a competitive tender or a competitive bid that meets a price point. Very rarely does a Tier 1 miner actually go beyond that price point and say, how can we embed our contractors to be one family? And I use the example. I heard some really good things and really positive things from the GM of South Flank in regards to BHP, and full credit to them. I take nothing away from that. But that's not the view of the contractors. In fact, I'd be surprised if any of those statistics actually came from contracting partners. They were from BHP employees. And that's great for BHP employees. But as Christina said, the bulk of the workforce is made up of contractors. And some contractors, to their credits, have very sophisticated systems in place. They have dedicated HSEQ professionals, HR professionals, IR professionals. But when we go down the spectrum to the Tier 3s, Tier 4, Tier 5, where we've got contractors coming in and out of the sector, they may be in the manufacturing sector on the Kwinana Strip, but they're brought onto a project to do a specific task or purpose. They're put into some shitty contractors camp down the back of the block, made to feel like second-class citizens, no consideration to accommodation or the roster they're proposed to work on a shutdown, so on and so forth. And it goes down, the further down the contracting chain I go for my members, sometimes the worse it becomes. So whilst there's a lot of good things happening within the top end of town, and full credit to them for that, it's not going all the way down the chain as Navin wishes it would. And I get a little bit jaded, and I'll just finish here. 2014, I participated in a parliamentary inquiry into the mental health of FIFO and DIDO workers. And from that, a code of practice was developed. Really good work for everyone involved. I'm now sitting here in 2023 after another parliamentary inquiry into Enough is Enough. These things about respect at work, not being an arsehole, treating people with dignity and respect, they've been around for a long time. And we've made some good headway, but we can't take our foot off the gas on it. We've got to make sure that this goes all the way through the contracting partners.
I appreciate that frank assessment on the state of the challenge. I think that's why a lot of people are here in this room and just looking at the tone of the questions that are coming through on Slido, and we'll jump into them now. There's very much a sense of practically what do we do? There's an acknowledgement that, that shift is profound in the contractor base being more than half of the workforce base now, and acknowledging that there's quite a clear distinction in a lot of sites, in a lot of organisations around the treatment of the two. So let's jump into some of them. I'm going to group a couple of them together and I'll come to whoever wants to have a bite at it. Some questions around how do you ensure contractors feel safe to raise concerns? Contractors are hosted by the principal on site. How can they strike the right balance in terms of control, ownership of physical and psychosocial risk and safety versus a client? And what can mine operators do better to make camps safer for potentially vulnerable employees and contractors? So a bit in there around raising concerns, this dynamic, the power dynamic, the ownership dynamic on site, and this bit around what do we need to do better. We heard a lot of talk about camps this morning and physical design. Who'd like to have a first go at any element of that?
I'm happy to jump in at the first element. So it's actually prescribed under the part of the regulations that talks about your mine safety management system that consultation with workers is required. So that's the development, the implementation, the creation of your risk controls, and then your review and monitoring. So it is prescribed that you have to have your consultation with your workers, and that would be inclusive of your contracting partners and their representatives. So that's something we can't get away from. So we all understand why it's important, but it's apparent that we're grappling with the how and the what might that look like. But at the end of the day, I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record because as speakers this morning have said the same thing. This is going to come down to the culture. We need to have a culture where workers feel like it's okay to contribute and that the consultation is meaningful and that the communication is two-way and that people feel that when they're speaking that they are actually listened to and their views are considered, and then that goes both ways. If that culture does not exist, then your consultation with regards to building your MSMS is going to suffer. So that would be where I would land with regards to the first part of that question. I don't know if somebody else wants to pick up the accommodation, perhaps.
Yeah, because I'm hearing, I think that piece around the why, the how and the what. I'd love if anyone wants to jump in on that component of it. Navin?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, you go. Glenn, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sorry, Chris. I'm not going to contradict what you said, but in regards to worker consultation or workers' representatives consultation, when a mine safety plan a management plan is developed, very similar in the hydrocarbons industry when a safety case is developed, these are developed before there's workers on the ground. These are developed largely on the terrace and then implemented out on site. And I look at a greenfields mine site construction. There is no worker involvement in the design or layout of a camp. There hasn't been. And for the last 10 years, we've been saying that things around camp layout, camp security, swipe card access, better lighting, more connectivity as a community on site, these things are not new. But unfortunately, when it comes to worker consultation at that MSMS stage and the safety case stage in hydrocarbon, it doesn't happen because there's no workers engaged.
Sorry, just on that front, understand what you're saying, but one of the things we've done for a new project is to get a technical expert from the field from a different project and involve them in the design prior to commencing another project. That is how you can bring a practical experience to be as part of the consultation for development of MSMS. It's not always achievable, but if you use that methodology, you are setting the tone early that you can have involvement, you can have consultation, you can have communication, and you carry that through. When the team then gets to the ground, they've already got that expectation, you've got open communication internally, and you've set that tone to establish that with the client. Now, it's not always practical, but that is one measure we've done to actually achieve that at an early stage at the design point of view.
Go for it, John.
I'd probably just talk to the culture piece about how do you make it easier and safer for people to speak up. I kind of, as I was listening to everyone, it's diversity and inclusion is massive there, right? We're blessed with beautiful diversity in our business. We're 54% female, 6% Indigenous. A lot of our people come from different cultures. English is a second language, and we have a lot of people who express sexual diversity. So we've got this kaleidoscope. Now, in that, a very, I guess, upfront Australian-type person who's very confident might be more inclined to speak up than someone who's not from that culture. So, and remember, mining, and especially in the services we provide, we look at making sure that we don't just apply one lens to make it easier to speak up. We kind of are sympathetic to how people will speak up. I think culture too is a client can be very demanding, and as soon as you become aware of something, you've got to report it, right? Now that might work for safety. It doesn't work for a sexual harassment type issue. Take a person where they're seriously embarrassed due to their culture, they don't want to report it. So it has to be done in a very respectful, that's absolutely focused on support for the person. Forget timelines. And therefore it's about the training and support you put around in your leadership to actually support that person. So it's actually quite complicated. And I think it's multi-lens, I think, when it comes to culture. But clients do have a big part to play. There's 3 words that one of my colleagues prepped me on. Fairness, consistent and transparency. You know, client to contractor must feel the same. It will be very helpful. And it's almost a higher, harder hurdle. You almost need to treat your people harder to comply, to jump that hurdle than the contractors, because the contractors will be watching and going, not so fair, not so consistent. Why was my accommodation removed, right? And theirs wasn't. So there's a couple of comments. So.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point around, quite a bit in that, but the nuanced piece around the training required for leaders to be able to effectively handle these particular matters, acknowledging the diversity and the need to make sure we've focused on supporting the person that might have been through an incident of this particular nature. I think that's really, really critical. One of the things I'm interested to get the views on is sort of the extension of some of what we're talking about here to actually site safety and camp safety, which was one of the questions that's come through quite a bit. What can mine operators do better to make camps safer? So if we're extending that idea of, I think that was a good point there around we need different processes and strategies. Not everyone's going to come knocking on a door as a way of speaking up. That's deluded of us to think so. So what are our strategies and our systems that allow people to report in a variety of ways, and how do we thoughtfully deal with that when that happens in a manner that's really emotionally sensitive and caring for the person at the heart of it? Then there's this bit around the actual site design. John, I don't know if you want to go to that first. It's obviously something you think through a little bit with the dynamics of camps.
So I think you can split camp safety or village safety into the infrastructure piece and then the cultural piece. And I actually think the cultural piece is much harder, but it's also where you'll get the biggest results. Get that right, and the infrastructure kind of looks after itself. So just on the infrastructure, yes, there was a comment made that we've made great progress on CCTV and lighting, and well, from our experience, some sites have, but some sites haven't. So we see that. So we see infrastructure still, there's an opportunity there. I think, as a provider of these village services, the induction is almost to the village, to the camp. We hate that word camp, by the way, village. It's almost an afterthought, right? You sit down and you do your video on mine safety and all this sort of stuff, and then there's the camp and there's the rules, that sort of stuff. But if you think about that 85% stat, and you think about where a lot of those incidents happen in the camp, why aren't we doing more to actually remind people, by the way, they're going to be vulnerable people here. There are people that require you to be even more conscious of your behaviour in the camp. That would be helpful, would be one thing. I think on the cultural side, I think my last comment, that's probably where we go, which is the training, the education, the induction of people, and you can't just do it once, right? We do it endlessly. We are constantly in a way that our frontline responds to, videos and stories that they tell about their experiences. We have an engagement app that we use, which we just give people this nudge every now and again about respectful behaviours, about support you have, those sorts of things are other ways. And I always say that everyone will behave at a pre-start, everyone will behave at a toolbox, right? But what actually happens when you've got 2 or 3 people out on the work site, and how does that behave? And kind of you need to constantly go in and check your team, ask the front line, ask the front line, Is it getting through? How can we adapt? Does the language make sense? I don't know if I answered the question, Holly, and I may have digressed a bit. But
No, all good. I want to move us to reporting because there's a lot of questions coming through here around reporting requirements, place onuses on PCBUs to report incidents. How do you ensure the mine operator and contractor responsibilities are aligned? How are you thinking about that particular challenge? You know, there's a number of people just talking about as well, you know, as contractors, what do you do when an allegation's been received about your staff on a site? What controls and measures are appropriate? So how should we think about reporting? What does reporting done well look like? Who'd like to jump in on that?
Yeah, look, I think that reporting piece comes back to framework structures we put in place, but ultimately, if the culture isn't right, people are not going to report. You can have all the framework, you can have everything in place, but we've seen it time and time again. If the culture isn't right, people are afraid to report because of repercussions that come with it. So ultimately, we need to set clear roles and responsibilities formally between each party, contractor, client, principal, for who does what in a situation, but we need to enable that in the first place by having the right culture, and that comes to how you operate internally and the values of the business. If we have it on the wall and no one can repeat the values, they're not actual values because they're not behaving and we're not operating by them. So if we can set that up from the start, where everyone on site feels comfortable, whether you are a principal or a contractor, and this is a big point for me, is everyone should be known as a worker. We need to move away from contractor and principal. If we set that up, the reporting lines are there. We'll actually see effective reporting and timely reporting because no one's afraid of repercussions. That's what proper reporting looks like if it's set up all the way through an organisation, from senior leadership through to the front line.
I want to tease that out a little bit if we can, because I think, I don't want to presume to speak for the room, but that whole idea of we can start a particular way and it can all be set up the way that we want is probably a little bit different to where a lot of people in this room are meeting this, which is, okay, maybe I'm hearing this and this is a moment where, not necessarily line in the sand, that might be too extreme, but I know we've got to do better. How do we practically shift culture around reporting? You know, there is a reality that, you know, a lot of people think reporting and speaking up is a career limiting move. There's a culture of fear. There's data that came out in the parliamentary inquiry process that speaks to, well, is it futile if I report because very few things that are reported on are actually taken seriously? So practically, if you can draw us to a leader, an example of a culture, an organisation, a practical step, what have you seen work to start to change the reality for reporting cultures?
Look, on that front, we've had that internally as well, and there is no quick fix. Ultimately, it'll come down to an instance where it has been reported, it's been treated appropriately, and it has not affected that individual's career progression. Now, this is going to take years for it to become acceptable and the norm where individuals feel comfortable. If anyone here thinks it's going to happen overnight, unfortunately it isn't. And it's going to be each instance occurring and individuals realising that they haven't been limited, speaking to a colleague and encouraging them to speak up and finding they haven't been limited, and slowly working its way through the industry where people feel comfortable. This is not a quick fix.
You want to jump in, Glenn? Oh no, Christina, go for it, and then I'll come to you.
We continue to see the reports as the regulator. So we see them from the PCBUs, whether that be the mine operator or another PCBU somewhere along the line. We see them from people's parents, people's loved ones. We also hear them from the very distraught and distressed people directly. It's still happening. It's happening today. The reports are still coming through. So I completely agree. This is going to take time, and we are making headway. But certainly, I want to promote again the 24/7 phone line for workers. Ideally, in the first instance, you've created a culture where your workers can come and speak to you. You can report it. If it's a notifiable or it's a reportable event, you can let the regulator know and you can pursue your duties that way. If the culture isn't there, that phone line is available. And I want to reassure workers that you can call us, you can decide that you would like to remain anonymous, you can decide how much confidentiality that you want to maintain. Do you want to tell us all of the details and are you happy for us to share your details, or would you prefer to remain completely anonymous and let us know that it happened at a particular mine? That information comes to us. It does come to a specialist team. They're a trained, competent, dedicated team, and they take all of these reports seriously. You have your duties under the legislation, as do we. We do have a duty to investigate those matters when they come through to us. So ideally, best case scenario, the culture exists that you can report and you're comfortable to do so, and that gets given through to the regulator. And when it comes to us, we say, great, you've got your controls. There's nothing more for us to do and we don't need to take any action. On the flip side, we end up having to issue notices and attend site and the like. I just want to make comment on the question back about accommodation and the examples given from BHP and what you can do with your accommodation. You can look at your data. Where are the reports happening? And the reason why I bring those together is a number of sexual assaults and sexual harassments happen in the laundries. So that simple measure of bringing the facilities to clean your own laundry in your room is going to go a very long way for people that were potentially previously exposed. The smoking huts after hours, that's another area where these things happen. But it's not just confined to the accommodation, it does happen throughout the mine in multiple different locations. So I just wanted to say, look at your data. What is your data telling you? Where are your areas of risk? What is your operational environment telling you? Where do you need to start? It's the same as anything with regards to risk management. We identify our risks, we implement our controls, and we monitor and review them. I would be surprised if there wasn't a company in the room that doesn't already have some sort of data set that tells them where these things are happening, at what time, is it certain shifts, etc. Start with the data.
Glenn, I know you want to jump in, so go for it. I also want to ask you your thoughts. We've got a question around, are there great examples of operators consulting effectively with contractor workers? So anything you can draw our attention to there as well.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. Look, I'll go back to the first point. I see it as a bit of a tale of two cities in regards to reporting. There's been some really great initiatives done since the Enough is Enough and the Kate Jenkins Respect at Work report in regards to anonymous reporting. And I think WAPOL just introduced an online platform and app yesterday in regards to reporting sexual assault, harassment, so on and so forth, as has the regulator. And there's really good things on that. I also see a lot of good work being done by Tier 1 mining houses in regards to educating their employees, positive duty behaviours. You know, if you're a bystander, you should report it. And that may mean that the victim feels supported by their colleagues, because everything should be victim-centric in this process.
I think survivor-centric is the language we're increasingly moving to.
Sorry. And then I see the other tail of the city where I go back to the Tier 3, Tier 4 contractor world, and people are fearful. They are in precarious work as it is. They may be new to mining, trying to get a start with a particular project or with one of the miners. And unfortunately, in my experience, people that complain the loudest get the window seat the earliest. And that is a common term most people in this room would be aware of. If you raise your head above the parapet, it will be knocked off and you'll be on a window seat. And unfortunately for the arseholes out there that do commit these horrible things in the workplaces, they may move to one of your workplaces down the track, because it then comes back to that contractor to do the vetting of that employee and their history, and why did you move on, why did you leave? Because end of contract, end of task is just not a suitable answer anymore. There needs to be more done in that space as well.
I've got two questions I want to ask you all about learning that have come through. These are fantastic questions too. Thank you so much for everyone who's contributing to the conversation. One question around contractors make up so much of the workforce and therefore the culture, but as we're not their employer, we can't make respect training mandatory. How do we solve for that educational challenge? And then there's a question around, how do we learn from incidents and improve controls while not re-traumatising workers? So I'm interested in both those sides of training. Proactively, how do we get people educated around the sorts of material we've talked about today? But secondly, the actual culture of learning we go on as an organisation when there are incidents, how do we improve without causing more harm? Thoughts on either of those from the panel? John?
Okay, learning. So what, just from our experience, and when we started our Respect Starts With You, which we did that in 2019, we asked our people, frontline people, to share their stories. So these will be people from different cultural backgrounds. They'll talk about sexual harassment or sexual assault they'll talk about discrimination, they'll talk about bullying, but they'll real stories. And I don't know about you, but when you get your workforce to tell stories to your workforce, they listen a lot more than messages that come necessarily from the top. So we love that, we embrace that, because it's in language that our frontline teams understand. Our Respectful Behaviours program, which came out of Respect Starts With You, there's 8 simple posters, and we put them all over the place in workplaces. 99.9% of clients have allowed us to do that. And they're in language that everyone understands. It's just a pat, and the pat's crossed out. It's harassment, or it's just a joke. Joke crossed out, bullying. Now, we've had clients come up to us and compliment us on just the simplicity of the message, and we actively share it with our clients. So language is so important to educate frontline. Owen said it, I think, in the session before. It's about the frontline. They've got to understand this stuff. And so we've got these 8 simple posters, and we reinforce it constantly. And we train our site leaders, and we train middle management and execs constantly. So that's what we do. And it has, we think we're encouraged. That's the only word I'll use. We're encouraged on our progress. We're not there yet.
And it's not necessarily that it's an either or, it's probably a yes and. So that, traditional training plus, but that piece around not seeing education is limited to a typical classroom setting. That every touch point in your environment and site is an opportunity to be educating and reinforcing messages. Posters on the back of toilet doors, information when you land on site, all those sorts of things are opportunities to educate. Others on this, the piece around both how do we do the learning and then how do we learn when we have incidents?
Just following on from what John said, and I actually agree 100%, people learn from people. Peer-to-peer learning is one of the best methods of educating workers, and I represent workers, so I get down to their level. I am a worker. We're all workers at the end of the day. We all put our pants on the same way every day, every morning. Getting a bunch of blue-collar workers into a classroom to be spoken at by a HSEQ manager with death by PowerPoint is not the answer. Getting out on site, talking to your employees, talking to your contracting partners, bringing them along for the journey, that to me is the absolute key, peer-to-peer engagement.
Whoever asked this question, thank you. It's a fabulous question. There's a paper that's been written, and it's in the context of it's the Alliance for Adolescents and Youth and Engagement, and I've spoken about this when I go to the Mining and Petroleum Advisory Committee, and the paper talks about parental engagement from kindergarten through to year 12, and I just think in terms of a concept, when the child is very, very young, you want involvement, you want to be present, you want to be at the school, you want to know what's happening after hours. In the same way, when we have newer contractors or we want to call them workers, we want to move to that terminology. But when we have these newer people to our sites, we want to be involved. So as Glenn said, it's peer-to-peer. It's being there, it's being present. It's, as the PCBU of that workforce, showing up, being present on the site and not completely abdicating that responsibility and leaving that to the mine operator. And then as that relationship grows, or as that child grows, essentially, you end up as year 11, year 12 student. It's about engagement and being positively engaged and having the ability to step away and have some trust. So I think we have to look at that engagement on a spectrum, and we need to work out where we're at, evaluate your operating environment, what does your data tell you, work out exactly where you are on the spectrum, and then how you're going to make that step change. But we heard this morning as well from Sharon, and we're probably going to hear it later on this afternoon, that bringing people in and giving them one round of training and saying sexual harassment's bad, please stop, that's not going to be sufficient. It needs to be sustained, ongoing reminders about where your line is as an organisation, what is your organisational context and culture prescribing. So I think we need to be a little bit more committed. And it's interesting because that question started off with, we can't ask our contractors to do that training, and I would throw the challenge at us to why. Why could you not? If they're coming to your mine and they're coming to your village, why can you not have a say in what the minimum training that you would require them have before they walk into your work environment?
Yeah, absolutely. Starting to challenge that very paradigm too, right? Navin, anything to add to that conversation?
Yeah, I think on that front, as Christina said, it should be mandatory training. Training to go on the front line and carry out work, like I said, whether it's blasting, is mandatory. Why is this not mandatory as well? It's as simple as that. It should be, and that is a non-negotiable. Now, I think in terms of the delivery, it needs to be tailored to the work group rather than a one-size-fits-all delivery. Yes, we have online packages. As an RTO ourselves, we do that. However, peer-to-peer, we need to tailor it to the work group to ensure the message is getting through and you're getting buy-in. As Glenn said, death by PowerPoint is not going to achieve anything. So we need to have interactive forums that suit each work group and tailor it that way.
It's a great point too, isn't it? Mandatory training without thinking meaningfully about what that training looks like and how you design for actual learning outcomes is a tick box exercise. So that piece around managing both those things, how do we make sure everyone's doing the training, but then how do we make sure the training's actually delivering the outcome and supporting ultimately the change in behaviour and culture that we're seeking to drive? This is exactly an example of what I said this morning when I said we're not going to be able to cover everything that we want to cover in today's proceedings. What I hope we've done is started a conversation and opened up some of the issues and challenge points that you're dealing with in a way where we've been able to pick the brains of 4 people that are thinking through this and dealing with different aspects of it on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. In bringing our conversation to a close, what I'd love to ask just each of you in turn is after leaving this session and going away and thinking about how do we do contract management more effectively, that was really the banner, consultative and cohesive contractor management. What's one thing you would encourage everyone here that's listening to this conversation to go and do, whether that's asking a question, whether it's starting a conversation, whether it's a practical action they can take? Glenn, I might start with you and work my way down.
Thanks, Holly. For me, it would be go beyond price. Go beyond the price point of your tendering. Go beyond that. Go beyond everything as to the village and the camp accommodation you're putting your employees into, right down to the design of layout. So go beyond that price point, because I understand price is the main driver for the tendering process, but go beyond it. Think about the end result, which is the people. And I'll just finish off, Holly, by saying this is not just an issue for the mining industry. I think this respect and safety is a societal issue. And we all have a part to play, because I believe as a father we should all be raising good people. And Christina touched on it, that child and adolescent study, and we've had some conversations about it. We've all got a part to play by raising good people in this society we live in. And by raising better people, hopefully we'll make a better world and we'll stamp out these things that we're going through now. So,
thank you. John?
For me, I go to ask yourselves, because it worked for us, so I'm not saying it should work for you, but I've been asked to just give a comment. Diversity and inclusion. Ask yourselves honestly where you are in your business and your teams along that. So form a view, but then go and ask your frontline, where they think you are. And then from that data, do something.
Christina?
Here. That's exactly what I was going to say. Start with your data. You've got the information available to you. It's going to tell you where your risks lie and where you can start. What I would say is what you can have a look at, you're going to have your longer term goals, but in order to get some momentum, what is your data telling you about some quick wins? Can you get 4 or 5 quick wins across the line to reassure your staff that you're actually taking this seriously? So you can get those quick wins across the line, you build the momentum, and they then have confidence that they're not being told to hurry up and wait for those longer term items. They'll start to trust you.
That's a great point, that quick wins are critical to building back trust. Navin?
I think one thing that we did and benefited us as an organisation was 6 years ago we sat back, we looked at our values on the wall and no one could mention them. And that for us really hit home that they weren't hitting the mark. So what we did was we went out to the workforce, we got feedback, and we asked the workforce to describe us as a company, and they are now our values. Now I think that was a big lesson for us, and if those values that come back from the workforce don't match where you are now and what's on the wall, you need to look at it. Take that away, look at it as a lesson, and either change the values, or if you still believe in the values, change how you're operating as an organisation, and you'll never look back.
Brilliant. I want to thank all of you for the openness and the candour that you've approached really sensitive and challenging subject matter with. And I particularly want to thank everyone in the room who asked such thoughtful questions, not only for the fact that you asked them in this room so we could have the conversation, which ultimately is where this stuff starts. Unless we can have these conversations, we can't take different action, because we can't actually nut it out, the complexity, but also make it safe to move forward and do something differently. So I want to thank all of you for shaping the conversation, but also for the fact I think that's reflective of you're the people that are moving beyond this room and shaping the conversations and the actions outside of it. So can you join me in thanking our panel for a fabulous session, and yourselves for that matter.